Let's be real here. APAC North is in crisis mode. Okay, maybe not crisis mode, but there are some alarming signs for the region. Despite the money being poured into it thanks to Ubisoft and the R6 share program, this sub-region has not given us consistent results at an international LAN in years. Whether it was part of the old APAC North, their own separate regions, or now. And when we do have a smidgen of a solid result, they don't last long. It's more sizzle than steak, and as a result, us APAC fans are left hungry. This sub-region has been built as the backbone of APAC, and the only constant is how far behind we are compared to the rest of the world. Even with Dplus bringing in a full Brazilian roster to play on behalf of South Korea, it has not done enough to raise the bar on the quality of Siege in both Japan or South Korea. Couple that with the collapse of PSG talent towards the back end of last year, and the lack of a dedicated T2 system for South Korea specifically, not to mention a not-so-small law in South Korea that says men above the age of 18 must serve 2 years in the military, the player pool is strained to the point of breaking. Nevertheless, we still have a full league of 8 teams within APAC North for 2026. 5 Japanese, 2 South Korean, 1 Brazilian. Fortunately, it does look to be somewhat competitive at first glance. Unfortunately, the deeper you dig, the more lopsided it gets. I'm not talking about overall skill as players or as a team, but I'm talking about overall experience in the top flight of Siege's competitive ecosystem. So, operators, welcome to Stage 1 of the 2026 Blast R6 Asia Pacific League's North Subdivision. Yeah, I got nothing for this one. And we begin with the first of our 2 teams to come up from the APAC North Challenger Series, Can You Be My Enemy? Or BME, as we will refer to them for the sake of ease. Consisting of JV63, no relation to JV92, Dokov, Gopi, Yoshili, and I'm going to butcher this at least once, Bokokoro Momozi. I think I got that right. They are actually the first batch of completely new rookies from Japan to make it into Tier 1 for some time, which in itself is an achievement for the region. But their initial foray into the top level of competitive Siege was rough, to say the least. When you have your debut match against Brazilian import roster Dplus, you come in with the expectation of getting smacked around, which they did, sadly. And it didn't get any better when they lost their lower bracket match against the former Enterforce 36 roster and were eliminated from kickoff after only 2 matches. Even with Asfel and Seikingo coming in for the outgoing JV63 and Yoshiko, Stage 1 is where we should see these guys grow in experience and improve their skill as a team. The more matches they play, the more they learn. And maybe we can see them snag a win during the group stage, which I think should be the goal for BME. Forget about qualifying for EWC, forget about making top 4. Just get yourselves at least 1 win in the group stage. If they can do that and push their results from their kickoff to one side, it gives them something to build on for the rest of the year. But while BME's kickoff results were understandable given their collective experience, that's not the case for this next team. And that's BNK FearX, who have done one of the dumbest things you can do during any post-SI offseason. After a disastrous 6 Invitational campaign that saw them miss out on playoffs by 1 stinking fucking map, FearX decided to change things up drastically by dropping nearly everyone on the roster and the support staff. The only survivor of this massacre was Woogie Man. When I first saw that, I was getting flashbacks to SI 2022, when Team Empire committed their great culling after they lost in the grand final to TSM. I could not believe FearX was doing the same thing to the best roster South Korea had seen in years. I was speechless. And the crazy thing is they did not have a coach. All they had was Nova as an analyst. So Woogieman, Misa, Rumatic, Stetzel, and NL were effectively on their own. And it showed during kickoff with 2 straight losses against both Scarz and Help Us LFO. Now, to their credit, that FearX roster was not completely terrible. There was the occasional flash of potential, but a lot of people expected a better result from this new team, and it was clearly not working. The only reason they were not dead last was because BME struggled against them during the 7th place match. It is clear that FearX is no longer at the top of the pecking order within APAC North, and they need a lot of work if they want to climb back up the mountain. However, if I'm being honest, I was not completely confident in this roster. And clearly, neither was FearX, as NL and Rumotic was given the heave-ho just within the last couple of weeks, and half the ex-PSG talent core that have been signed in their place. Reuniting Miso with his ex-teammates and combining them with Woogieman? Now that does look rather promising, if not a little underwhelming. With this new roster, can FearX do some damage this stage? With this new roster, they might just be able to, and they kind of need to if they want to remain relevant in 2026. That said, I wouldn't get your hopes up too much. On to the other team that came up from Challenger Series, or more accurately, they came up from relegation, the former Enterforce 36 roster, who are now competing under new Siege Esports org, RRX. The end of the 2025 season saw E36 get relegated from APAC North despite placing 4th during Stage 2 and playing in the APL Major Qualifier during PAX Melbourne for a chance to qualify for the Munich Major. They didn't do particularly well, but at least they took a step forward. Following news that E36 would be sent down a Challenger Series to remain within APAC, the org split from the roster and seemingly pulled out of Siege for the foreseeable future. In the meantime, Mao, Akasu, Yu, Mugi, and Jin stuck together and would be competing orgless until they found themselves a new home. And their first time out during kickoff was less than stellar. But in fairness, it could have gone a lot worse. The first match against fellow Japanese team CAG Osaka, who we will go into greater detail later, No Name, as they were referred to at the time, would be sent down to the lower bracket to face fellow Challenger Series team BME to keep their kickoff hopes alive. And it was very decisive for No Name, despite BME mounting something of a challenge after their 7-0 Map 1 loss. Unfortunately, Scarz were one step too far for No Name, as they were eliminated from kickoff 2-1 in the lower bracket semis. Now playing under the RRX banner, Duo has been brought in for the outgoing Mugi, which again, I can't tell if this is an upgrade or not. But even back when they were playing under E36, RRX were a reliable, if inconsistent, roster, merely plugging away within APAC North until Stage 2 last year, where they got in that incredible 3rd place by beating PSG talent in the lower bracket. 6th place may look like a downgrade in first glance, but keep in mind, the format for kickoff in the APL doesn't necessarily give teams who have a poor start a chance to mount a comeback later in the stage. We should see RRX comfortably fighting for a spot in the mid-pack within Stage 1, but don't be all that shocked if we see them challenging for the top 4 again. On the subject of PSG talent, the former rosters also stuck together for the foreseeable future under Help Us LFO. The last few months of their PSG talent days were not exactly ideal, only just scraping into last year's APL Major Qualifier, missing out on major qualification after losing to Enterprise at the final hurdle, failing to reach the APL Regional Finals and SI 2026 altogether. And when PSG talent withdrew from Siege, the boys found themselves without an org backing them. But they were able to keep their competitive license so they could still retain their spot in APAC North. Gotti decided to leave the team late last year to join future CNL team 4AM as the coach, so Harper was lured back from E36's coaching staff to play for Help Us in the 2026 season. Their kickoff stage wasn't great, but again, it was not the worst it could have been. Even with an overtime win over Kinotrop on Fortress, Help Us would still lose to the Japanese squad 2-1, and be sent down to the lower bracket to face off against the only other South Korean squad in APAC North. In the SK Survival match, Help Us showed us who the real top dogs of South Korea were as they downed the new FearX roster 2-0, both maps turning into slugfests just to settle a winner. However, Dplus ultimately took the crown of best team from South Korea in the very next match, putting Help Us's campaign to rest. Now, here's something embarrassing. I'm not entirely sure what to make of Help Us LFO going to Stage 1 proper, especially since most of the team went over and joined FearX for Stage 1. What's worse, at the time of recording, we don't even know what the rest of the roster is going to look like, or if they even do have a new org to call home. I can't confirm this for certain, but according to the official R6 Esports website, they do have a new home in Trippy Main Telecom. Normally, they are pretty accurate, especially after roster locks, and they publish information for the rest of the world to see. But I have not been able to find anything on social media about an announcement or a team lineup. Complete radio silence this close to Playday 1 of your domestic stage? Not a good sign. Our 4th place team from kickoff, well, that's an interesting case. Scarz was once at the top of the Japan League on a consistent basis, attending all 4 majors during that 2-year period, made it all the way to the playoffs in one of them, and qualified for the 6th Invitational in 2024 and 2025. But since that top 8 finish in the Copenhagen Major, they've slowly tumbled down the order. In fact, since Japan and South Korea were combined for 2025 onwards, Scarz have only been in the top 3 once. They've failed to make a dent since, and Kickoff continues that same trend of extended mediocrity, even with the changes they made during the offseason. They lost Ayagator, TOP, and coach Eclair, and they brought in former Kinotrope coach Leo as well as Yuki's for their starting 5. And former player Nina was brought back into the team after his brief stint on E36. They actually had a solid start to the bracket with a 2-0 win over FearX and taking map 1 against Kinotrope in the very next round. But sadly for Scarz, Kinotrope would bounce back to perform the reverse sweep and send their Japanese rivals down to the lower bracket. Facing off against the now August Help Us LFL roster, they would let a clean 2-0 slip from their fingers thanks to Help Us taking their map pick of Consulate in OT. But Scarz would bounce back and take the decider in convincing fashion. In the end though, they couldn't match up against Dplus and would fall 2-0, ending their kickoff campaign outside the top 3 again. While I wouldn't say that changes that Scarz made before the kickoff have failed spectacularly, like other teams mentioned in this video already, I can't really say they succeeded either, as they've returned essentially to the 5-stack they've had for the longest time, just with Yuki's instead of TOP and Leo for Eclair as the coach. There are some promising signs going into Stage 1, but we have been fooled before. On the topic of change, however, Kinotrope certainly takes the cake on that count, at least within APAC North. As mentioned earlier, they lost both Yuki's and coach Leo to Japanese rival Scarz, but Mao also left to join the ex-E36 roster, and Sylvia decided to retire from comp, all announced within the same day. So what do? Well, how about poaching Eclair and Ayagator from Scarz, pulling Ayagator's old CAG Osaka teammate Gatorada out of retirement, once again proving the old Siege adage of pros never retiring, and scouting former Outlast's OCE coach Okamesh as the new coach. Suddenly, Kinotrope looks rather deadly within APAC North. Kickoff actually started strongly for the Japanese squad, with 2 straight wins over Help Us LFO and Scarz in the first 2 rounds of the bracket. They did drop a map in both of those wins, but it doesn't matter too much in the playoff bracket. All that matters is being the first to 2 map wins. However, both CAG Osaka and Dplus would be too much for Kinotrope's chances at competing in Salt Lake City, eliminating them in back-to-back 2-0 losses. And they were pretty one-sided for the most part. Kinotrope certainly feels like a team with potential to push for an upset or 2 during the group stage, and they might just be good enough to make it into the playoffs. Having Okamesh behind them as the coach is going to be so crucial for them throughout Stage 1, as well as the former Cyclops boys of Ayagator and Gatorada to provide that much-needed experience to help them climb up the rankings. Kinotrope feel primed to explode now they've had time to properly gel together for kickoff. They feel that way. The runners-up of APAC North's kickoff bracket was the last remaining import team that was started in 2025. The only one to have survived post-SI and still managed to post solid results within their respective region, Dplus. Speaking of the 6th Invitational, Dplus actually had a decent campaign in Paris, despite being in the group of death. 3rd in their group, starting in the upper bracket, ultimately being eliminated in the second round of the lower bracket by the APL compatriots, Weibo Gaming. During the offseason, both Bullet and PJH departed the team, with Muzi and Hellraiser coming in from SAL teams Black Dragons and Los, respectively. Seeing the success of Brazilian coaches in other regions, it makes a degree of sense why Dplus decided to go for Brazilian themselves. Moving on. As you would expect from the import roster, kickoff was pretty successful for Dplus, winning their first round match against Be My Enemy in a dominant 2-0. Seems pretty standard for the Brazilian squad. Which makes the fact they lost to CAG Osaka the next round in the very same fashion all the more bizarre. Now in the lower bracket, Dplus would utterly dismantle all comers on their way to the grand final. Help Us, Scarz, Kinotrope, all taken down 2-0, all dominant wins. Now rematched against CAG for a spot of the major on the line, Dplus actually made it all the way to a decider map after winning in overtime on Nine Heaven Labs. Sadly, Clubhouse was one map too far and the Brazilian squad fell at the final hurdle. Part of me wants to think that Dplus is the sole hope for APAC North right now, given they were the best placed team from the region in Paris and they were the closest to beating CAG Osaka during kickoff. But the pragmatist in me says I need to come up with something better than this. And sadly, I have. Dplus played CAG Osaka twice during the kickoff bracket and lost to them twice. Granted, the grand final match was a lot closer than their first match, but that doesn't count for jack if you can't get the win you need when it matters the most. It's no good almost winning something. The only currency in this game is wins and losses. And Dplus came up short twice. Maybe things will improve for them during stage 1, but they need to make the wins count if they want to claim that EWC slot for APAC North. Now we come to CAG Osaka, APAC North's sole representative in Salt Lake City, and I am just about done with these idiots. Failing to qualify for the 6th Invitational for the second time in 3 years, CAG returned to APAC North with the aim of reclaiming the top step of the podium for kickoff and qualifying for the first major of the year. To do that, they brought on first-time coach from Italy, Sparky, who was last seen as managers for Makers back in 2021. Now, bringing staff and players back in from the cold of retirement or inactivity isn't necessarily a bad thing. Just look at Mag for Enterprise or Bolo during his stint on DZ a year after he retired the first time. And to start with, it looked like it was working, as CAG would not drop a map on their way to the grand final against Dplus. Even though it did require all 3 maps, the Japanese squad took down the Brazilian imports and booked their flights to phase 2 of the Salt Lake City Major, which was right around when we realized that we were suckers to believe in CAG Osaka. Not only could they win a single fucking map during the Swiss phase, ultimately being eliminated in the 0-3 pool alongside Fury, which in itself is another story, but their whole system is an absolute mess from top to bottom. And the biggest what the fuck moment from SLC? Right before the end of their elimination match against Five Fears, Sparky actually walked out of the team room and left his team to take in the fact they had been eliminated from the major alone. How disrespected the CAG boys must have felt inside as they walked out and congratulated Five Fears by themselves. And I don't give a flying fuck what they said after the fact. A coach stays with his team until the very end. I honestly don't know how they do it anymore. They have a decent run in the domestic league, only to completely implode the second they get to a LAN. This has been the exact same story for nigh on 7 fucking years. Save for a brief moment during early 2025 before the incident. It is absolutely fucking infuriating how many times this has happened, and they just don't do anything about it. Oh, by the way, the whole Black Ray saga, that also coincides with the last time they made any kind of roster change, when one of their coaches was forced to be on the active roster and the other coach retired. And Didi is still on the starting 5. It's almost like they're perfectly fine with being a metaphorical punching bag, dragging the rest of the region down to the depths with them. I could say a lot worse than I have already, but then I would be effectively committing professional suicide. It feels like there is a clear divide between the top 2 of APAC North and the rest of the league, similar to what we have in Asia and Oceania. But unlike those 2 subdivisions where the gap is slowly shrinking and there is potential for other teams to raise their standings, the reverse is true for APAC North. The gap is increasing, and what's worse is the top teams aren't actually getting any better. If CAG Osaka's performance in SLC is indicative of what to expect, then I am very concerned for APAC North going to Stage 1 and EWC. Maybe even the rest of the year. And with that, we come to the end of our Stage 1 preview for the North subdivision of the APL and the APL region altogether. What do you think of our teams for Stage 1 of APAC North? Let me know in the comments below as always, as well as who you think will take the top spot for this stage. If you like this video and you want to see more of it, you know what to do by now. Feel free to like the video and subscribe to this channel. Also, a small update on things within the Siege ecosphere. I'm going to be making regular contributions to Project Prisma's news sections. Along with Brazilian content creator Capellini, we will be providing weekly recaps for the domestic league throughout Stage 1. So if you haven't already, go check out Project Prisma. I will leave a link in the description below. Keep an eye out there as well. There's also going to be a couple of different opinion pieces that'll be floating out throughout the year, as well as a very interesting interview that is going to be coming up at the hands of Capolini. But until next time, operators, this is your resident Silverwolf, signing off.